Time now for Focus. Today we have a report from Burma, a year after one of the world's most famous prisoners of conscience, Aung San Suu Kyi, came to power. When her National League for Democracy was sworn in as the country's ruling party, expectations were extremely high for change. But now Suu Kyi, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, faces questions over her leadership and silence on persecution. Also, there are many online defamation cases that have fostered a panic over freedom of speech. Clovis Casali reports.
At the South Dagon Pagoda, San Suu Kyi found the peace and quiet he needed after spending 6 months behind bars. This Burmese had dared to criticise online the Member of Parliament he voted for and who belongs to Aung San Suu Kyi's NLD ruling party.
They put 150 people in cells that were built for 50 people. We were treated like animals, like chickens trapped in a cage. But I have no regrets. As a citizen, I have the right to speak out. They used their power to imprison me. If I see in the future something that's wrong, I won't hesitate to criticize again.
San Suu Kyi left his job in a bank because of his trial and joined a team of volunteers to renovate a Buddhist temple. It's a 2-hour-long drive from Rangoon, and here he's been reflecting upon his time in jail.
I was with murderers, criminals who were violent, but I was always focused on my spiritual practice. They saw that, so they respected me and left me alone.
Like dozens of others, including journalists and politicians, he was detained for months awaiting his trial on charges of online defamation under the 66D telecommunications law. A judge later dismissed his case. The military junta is no longer fully in charge, but freedom of speech remains curtailed under the de facto leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi. Human rights activist Wei Wei New set up in Rangoon workshops to offer young Burmese courses on the principles of democracy. A respected figure, she was invited to the White House by George W. Bush and Barack Obama to talk about her struggle as a Muslim Rohingya woman. Time magazine recently listed her as one of the next generation leaders. While refusing to strongly criticize Aung San Suu Kyi's 1 year in power, she's outraged to see that some 50 cases have been filed under Law 66D, as opposed to less than 10 under the previous military government.
We are seeing more and more charges and more cases. No one's freedom of speech is secure right now. The NLD government, military, and even individuals in the country misuse against each other. So the boys, the critical boys, we are afraid that the critical boys will be toned down, and it will become a threat to the democracy.
Many Burmese hoped the Nobel laureate would amend the 66D law, and they are still waiting. Mong is one of them. He himself was sent to jail after a poem of his irritated the head of the army. But this was under the military junta, and he doesn't understand why the situation hasn't improved.
The NLD government said that they would guarantee freedom of speech, but when they got into power, they changed. Now they just want to protect themselves from critics on the internet. That's why they don't want to amend the law. It's terrible.
The NLD played a major role in the pro-democracy movement that opposed the military dictatorship. So when it triumphed in the 2015 elections, expectations were high. Some of those who supported the lady over the years have now chosen to go their own way. Burma will soon have a new party vying to have its voice heard. Activists who played a key role in the Saffron Revolution are joining forces with former student leaders from the 1988 pro-democracy uprising. They believe no one in Aung San Suu Kyi's entourage is ready to speak up or contradict her.
I want to see a party with the real, like the democratic culture and collective decision. So this is very important. In NLD, I think like the power of the lady is too strong.
You're allowed to go here, not there.
Outside a Rangoon court, we find the poet Mong trying to reassure the wife of a government official on trial for criticizing the army chief's crackdown on the Rohingya community.
This law must be amended. It's not a fair case.
He is sentenced to 6 months in jail. His family is slightly relieved. They were expecting worse.
For more on the situation in Burma, I'm now joined by journalist Sylvie Brieux. She's the author of Birmanie, les chemins de la liberté, which translates as Burma, the roads to freedom. Hello, thank you very much for coming in. So we just heard there about freedom of speech issues, but I'd like to ask you more generally what people in Burma, if it is possible to answer such a general question, are making 1 year on of Aung San Suu Kyi and her government.
Well, when Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the National League for Democracy, won the election in November 2015, there were high expectations in the country. And today, a year after the government was came into power, there's a lot of disappointment because people's expectations were so high that they were going to be disappointed for sure after a year. And the situation, the main challenge for Aung San Suu Kyi is to bring peace to the country because the country is divided by there are ethnic and religious divides in the country. And since the independence of the country in 1948, there are being guerrillas, armed ethnic groups. Some armed ethnic groups have been fighting against the Burmese National Army. So she has to face that main challenge. There's also a rise in the hatred speech on social networks, and this is led by Buddhist extremist monks. So she has to face this and some major violations still of human rights in the country.
Now, you mentioned peace, and this really was her main issue before coming to power, peace. She's been criticised, though, for not saying very much about the situation in Rakhine State. There's been a crackdown there. There's even talk of crimes against humanity. Why is it that she's not speaking up? Is she afraid to speak up? Is there the issue of the military still very much keeping an eye on what she's doing and what she says?
Yeah, it's important to understand that Aung San Suu Kyi and her party have to rule with the military because it's still the drafted constitution. The constitution that rules the country, the political life of Burma, was drafted by the military in 2008, and it gives 3 ministries to the military. The key ministries, Ministry of Defense is in the hand of the military, the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Ministry of Border Affairs. There are 25% of the seats in Parliament are in the hands of the military as well. And also something important is that the president, who's a close friend of Aung San Suu Kyi, Tin Sho, has no control over the army. The person in charge of the army is the commander-in-chief of the army. So in Rakhine State, the major crackdown was there's fighting going on between the military is persecuting, the armed forces are persecuting the Rohingya people, the Rohingya Muslim people, and violence has been escalating over the past month since last November. So what can she say? I mean, I don't know how to answer that question, but I ask people who work with Rohingya people in Rakhine State where the violences are taking place, and they say that even if she was saying something, that wouldn't change anything.
Because she's not directly in control of what the military does.
Well, first, she's not in control at all of what the military does, but there's also something about saying something. She has no power the words she could say, even if she called for compassion, that wouldn't have any effect on, that wouldn't stop the violences against the Rohingya people, because the hatred against Rohingya people in Rakhine State is really endemic. And that was stated in a report by the UN a few years ago.
So where does her power come from then? What is it that she can really take control over, and does she perhaps have a long-term plan, because after all 1 year isn't very much time to bring about change?
Well, 1 year is not a lot of time after the country stopped for 50 years of military rules. The country has she has to start from scratch in different fields. It's hard to tell what she's really doing because she doesn't communicate much, and she's really reluctant to communicate with the media, because I guess she doesn't trust anybody.
She's been criticised for that.
She's been criticised for that, and although also Burma is not a dictatorship anymore, but it's not a democracy anymore. So I think in this bumpy or chaotic time, she's very cautious about what she's saying.
So she's in government, and now what happens on the ground when it comes to campaigning then on human rights issues? We heard in the report from an activist called Wai Wei Nu, and you mentioned her in the book that I mentioned at the beginning when I introduced you. So there are women, there are people still on the ground trying to bring about change as well.
Well, a lot of people have been inspired by Aung San Suu Kyi because she's been these iconic figures for almost 25 years now. And so they know, most activists in the field, in the ground, know they cannot expect everything for Aung San Suu Kyi anymore, so they have to take their own responsibilities. So a young lady like Wai Wei Nu, women play also a major change in paving the road to freedom and democracy, and they work really hard on trying to build bridges between community and trying to profoundly transform the society and trying to work beyond ethnic and religious divide that endanger the future of potential democracy in the country.
All right, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Sylvie Brieux, for coming in for today's Focus.